The afternoon I came home to find my suitcase at the bottom of the stairs, I almost didn't notice it. That's the strange part. I'd been at the pharmacy on Elm Street for close to an hour. They'd changed my insurance again, and nobody behind the counter could figure out the override, and I walked through the front door with my coat half-buttoned and my mind already on what I was going to make for dinner. Chicken soup, I'd decided. The weather had turned cold, and Harper had been sniffling all week. The suitcase was the big navy one, the one I'd bought the summer my husband and I drove to Vermont, the year before he got sick. I stood in the entryway and looked at it for a long moment. Then I looked at the rest of the room. Harper's backpack was missing from its hook by the door. The house had that particular quiet that a house gets when something has already been decided. My son-in-law came around the corner from the kitchen. He was still in his work clothes. He sometimes stayed home on Thursdays, and he had his phone in one hand and a coffee mug in the other, and the expression of a man who had already rehearsed what he planned to say. "Hey," he said, "so we've been meaning to talk to you about something." I waited. I had learned over 4 years in that house that he talked better when I let him go at his own pace. "My parents, they've been wanting to get out of Phoenix for a while. The heat's been bad for my dad's blood pressure, and my mom's been saying she wants to be closer to the grandkids." He took a sip of his coffee. "So we figured now was as good a time as any. We're going to have them come stay." I looked at the suitcase again. "They'll need your room," he said. "It's the only one with its own bathroom, and my mom has some mobility stuff going on with her knee." I looked toward the hallway that led to the back of the house. My room, where I'd spent 4 years, where I kept the cedar box with my husband's letters, and the reading lamp I'd brought from our old house, and the small framed photo of Harper at 2 years old, the one where she's grinning with blueberry jam all over her face. "I set up the pull-out downstairs," he continued, "in the basement. It's actually pretty comfortable. I slept down there once when my back was acting up." He said this like it settled the matter entirely. My daughter came in from the backyard then, carrying our grandson on her hip. She looked at me, and then at the floor in the way she'd been doing for a while, that slight angle away, like she was watching something just past my shoulder. She couldn't quite meet my eyes. "It's only temporary," she said. Her voice was careful. "Practice." I nodded. I didn't speak. There wasn't anything I could say right then that wouldn't change the air in a way nobody could take back, and I wasn't ready for that. Not yet. I moved my things to the basement that night. The pull-out couch was an older model, the kind with a crossbar that ran right across the middle at exactly the wrong height. The basement was unfinished on one end, exposed insulation, a water heater that clicked and groaned on a schedule of its own, and finished on the other, which is where I set up. My son-in-law had placed a small space heater nearby, along with a folding table and 2 extra pillows on the couch. I think he meant for this to be kind. I made the bed with my own sheets. I put the cedar box on the table. I turned the heater to its lowest setting, because I was not willing to need it on full. I lay there in the dark and listened to the house shift above me. His parents arrived 3 days later. His father, I'll say this for him, was quiet and kept mostly to himself. He sat in the living room with the television too loud and didn't ask for much. His mother was something else. She had opinions about the thread count of the sheets in the guest room, the mineral content of the tap water, and the specific coffee my daughter bought. She rearranged the kitchen cabinets on her second morning, and then spent the afternoon complaining she couldn't find anything. I said nothing. I cooked. I folded laundry. I helped Harper with her homework at the kitchen table in the afternoons, while his mother watched from the doorway like she was observing some foreign custom. I gave no indication I noticed. One evening, about a week after they arrived, I was washing the dinner dishes when I heard his mother say something to my son-in-law in the living room. I didn't catch all of it, just the phrase rent-free and then a laugh. His. "It's easy, warm, completely at home." I dried the dish I was holding very slowly, set it in the rack. Harper was at the table behind me, working on a word search. She had her pencil tucked behind her ear the way I used to wear mine when I graded papers, 40 years ago. She looked up at me, and I could tell by her face that she'd heard it too. "Grandma," she said quietly. "I know," I said. don't." She went back to her word search. That night, after the house went quiet, I sat on the pullout and opened the cedar box. I lifted out the letters, the photograph, and beneath them, folded flat in quarters, the deed. I hadn't looked at it in years. My husband had insisted on keeping the original, not a copy, the original, in the cedar box. He said it was the most important thing we owned. "Bank accounts run dry," he used to tell me. "Land doesn't go anywhere." We'd bought the cottage the summer my daughter was finishing her junior year of college. An old place on a dirt road, outside a small town in Vermont. 40 minutes from the nearest highway. My husband had seen a handwritten flyer tacked to a corkboard at a diner, of all places, and he'd taken it down and folded it into his coat pocket and called the number from the parking lot. The seller was a retired postal worker who had built the place himself in the late 70s and didn't want it going to strangers. My husband shook his hand. They agreed on a price over coffee. We signed the papers the following week, just our two signatures, side by side. My daughter didn't know it existed. We had planned to take her up there eventually to show her the pond trail and the little wooden dock my husband had fixed up with new planks one summer. But then he got sick, and then he was gone. And the cottage sat in Vermont the way some grief sits. Not disappeared, just waiting. I held the deed in both hands. Then I put it back in the box, laid my husband's letters on top, and made a decision. 2 mornings later, I was up before 4. I moved quietly, shoes in hand, until I reached the bottom of the basement stairs. Door eased shut behind me. I loaded my car in the dark, the cedar box, 2 bags, my reading lamp, because I was not leaving it behind for anyone. I went back inside once. Up the stairs. Harper's room was at the end of the hall, her nightstand stacked with library books the way her nightstand had always been. I slipped a folded piece of paper between the top 2. On it I had written the address of the Vermont cottage, and below that, "I'm safe. Come when you're ready, Grandma." I drove north as the sky began to lighten. I stopped for coffee in New Hampshire, a gas station with a pot that had been sitting too long, thick and slightly bitter, and I drank the whole cup and didn't mind. The radio played country music. I don't especially like country music, but I left it on. The cottage road was unpaved and narrow, just as I remembered. Pine trees close on both sides. My headlights caught the reflective marker at the turn. The car bumped over the ruts and stopped in front of the porch, and I sat there for a moment with the engine still running. The key had been on my key ring for 22 years, on the same ring as everything else. I turned it in the lock and the door opened the way old doors do. A little resistance, then all at once. Inside it smelled like cedar and cold air and something faintly sweet I couldn't identify. Mice had been in the pantry. I found the evidence, dealt with it without drama. The windows were grimy. The fireplace had leaves in it. The kitchen was intact, though. The cast iron pan I had left hanging above the stove was still there. My husband's fishing rod was leaning in the corner of the back room, exactly where he had put it. I stood in the middle of the main room for a long time. Then I went and found the woodpile under the tarp at the side of the house, brought in enough for a fire, and got to work. The days that followed had a texture I hadn't felt in years. I woke when I woke. I made tea at the old stovetop kettle, the kind that whistles, and stood at the window watching the light come up through the pines. I swept, I scrubbed. I moved the mugs to a lower shelf, because my husband had always put them too high, and I had never gotten around to changing it. On the 4th morning, I heard a car on the dirt road. I was sitting on the porch. I set my mug on the railing and watched. It was a silver SUV I didn't recognize, and it stopped at the end of my drive. The back door opened and Harper got out, her purple down jacket on, backpack over one shoulder, hood down the way she always wore it. She walked up the drive toward me. She was holding my piece of paper. "My friend's mom drove me," she said. I told her it was for a school project. She texted my mom and Mom said okay, a pause. I don't think Mom knew it was out of state. I opened my arms. She walked into them without slowing down. That first evening, she sat at the kitchen table and watched me make soup from what I'd found in the pantry. Lentils, dried herbs, a can of crushed tomatoes from God knows what year that turned out to be fine. She had her elbows on the table and her chin in her hands, in exactly the way her mother used to sit at 9 years old. And the similarity made my chest ache in the specific way that things do when they show you that time has passed, but certain things carry forward. Did Grandpa really build this whole place? She asked. Not all at once. He worked on it for about 6 summers. What parts? The back deck, the dock on the pond. He replaced all the flooring in this room. I tapped the floorboard under her feet. He was meticulous about it. He made me walk across it 40 times to make sure there were no squeaky spots. Were there any? One in the corner by the wood stove. He never did fix it. She found it immediately, the way children always find the one thing. She stepped on it 3 times, listening to the creak, a small smile moving across her face. That night she slept on the pull-out in the main room, an actual pull-out, a decent mattress, and I lay in the bedroom listening to real quiet. Not the quiet of a house where someone is always half listening, just stillness. My daughter called twice before noon the next day. I let them go. On the second one, she left a voicemail that said only, "Mom, please, I know where you are, please call me." I called her back that evening after Harper and I had walked the pond trail and watched a great blue heron stand motionless in the shallows for 20 unbroken minutes while Harper barely breathed beside me. My daughter answered on the first ring. "She's here," I said. "She's safe, she's happy." I heard her exhale, not a cry exactly, more like something that had been held a very long time. "Mom." Her voice was thin. His mother rearranged my whole kitchen. "I don't know where anything is. The baby has a rash and she keeps insisting I'm using the wrong wipes. He acts like nothing is wrong." A pause. "I didn't say a word when he told you to move downstairs. I just stood there. I still don't understand why." "I do," I said. "You've been keeping the peace for so long that you forgot peace and silence aren't the same thing." She didn't respond right away. "Harper needs to come home," she said finally, but it came out like a question. "Harper is fine. She got herself here on her own. That's not nothing." I waited a moment. That she found the note. She made a plan. She's 9 years old and she found her way to where she needed to be. You raised someone who knows how to do that. Silence on her end, softer. "Will you come back?" she asked. "No." "Mom." "I own a cottage, sweetheart. I've owned it for 22 years, paid off for most of them. My name is on the deed. I let that sit. I'm not without somewhere to go. I never was." Quiet. "I didn't know," she said. "About this place, I didn't know it still existed." "I should have told you sooner. I meant to. Then your father died and I moved in to help with the baby, and the moment kept not arriving, and then it had been long enough that it felt strange to bring up." I paused. "That's on me." She made a sound that was nearly a laugh. "You let him move you to the basement," she said. "And this whole time you had a cottage." "I needed to know what I was leaving," I said. "Now I know." A long pause. "I'm going to talk to him," she said. "A real conversation. Not me hoping he'll figure it out on his own." "I know. I don't know what's going to happen after that." "Neither do I, but I'll be here." Harper and I established a rhythm over the weeks that followed that felt, somewhat embarrassingly, like the best stretch of time I'd had in years. We woke early, both of us, made breakfast together, eggs, toast, pancakes on the days we felt ambitious. She was learning to cook with actual attention, watching the butter in the pan instead of staring off somewhere. We walked the trails every afternoon. She'd started keeping a bird notebook, a small spiral one she'd found in the cottage desk. She couldn't always identify what she saw, but she drew the birds from memory when we got back and wrote descriptions underneath. Gray chest, orange beak, suspicious. And on another page, very small, fast, strongly opinionated about the dock. She found the old tackle box in the shed and wanted to fish off the dock. I had to explain that the dock needed new planks before either of us set foot on it. She accepted this and immediately declared it a project for spring, which I did not correct. One evening, while I was reading by the wood stove and she was doing homework at the kitchen table, she looked up and said, "Dad called today." I looked at her over my reading glasses. "Mom said he wanted to apologize," she continued. She went back to her homework, but she said it wasn't a real one yet. She said she'd know a real one when it came. I went back to my book. She erased something. Did the problem again. Grandma, mm, are you glad you left? I thought about this honestly. Yes, I said, I'm also glad I stayed as long as I did, but yes, I'm glad I left when I left. She chewed the end of her pencil. I don't think Dad knew you had anywhere to go. No, he didn't. Is that why he did it? Because he thought you'd just have to put up with it forever? I looked at her for a moment. She was 9 years old and she had worked that out, sitting at a kitchen table in Vermont, with half a page of math left to do. I think so, I said. Some people mistake someone's patience for permanence. They think because you've always stayed that you always will. She wrote something in the margins of her notebook, not math. I didn't ask what. The call I hadn't expected came on a Tuesday, 3 weeks after I'd arrived. My son-in-law. The conversation was short. He said he hoped I was comfortable. He said the cottage sounded nice. He said things at home had been an adjustment. He said his parents would be heading back to Phoenix at the end of the month. He did not apologize. I did not ask him to. Some conversations are about clearing the air rather than rebuilding anything. My daughter called the following Sunday. Her voice was different. Not lighter exactly, but cleaner. More like herself. She said they'd started seeing someone. A couples therapist, Tuesday evenings. She said it was hard, but she was learning to say things out loud instead of absorbing them in silence and hoping they'd dissolve on their own. She said she'd told her husband what had happened to me was not going to happen again, and this time she'd felt it in her body when she said it, the way you do when you mean something past the point of retreating. She asked if she could bring the baby up sometime, for a weekend. I told her I'd make up the pullout. The deed is in a new folder now on the shelf in the bedroom, next to the photograph of my husband and me on the dock that first summer. We're squinting into the sun and he has his arm around my shoulders, and we look like people who don't yet know what's coming for them, which is exactly what we were. I find that I like it here in a way that has nothing to do with escape. I like it because it is mine. Because every board in this floor is familiar. Because the wood stove takes 3 pieces of birch and a solid 10 minutes to really come alive. And I know the exact rhythm of it now. Because the heron comes to the pond most mornings, and Harper has named him Douglas, which I told her was an objectively terrible name for a bird, and she said it was a perfect name, and I'm afraid she may be right. She went back to school last week. Her friend's mother drove her home, the same woman who had brought her here, who turned out to be the kind of person who said only that she was glad Harper had somewhere safe to land. I watched the car go down the dirt road until it disappeared in the pines. Then I went inside and washed the breakfast dishes, made fresh tea, swept the porch, not because anyone was coming, but because my husband always said a maintained space was a form of optimism, and I have found, lately, that I agree with him. I've started painting again. Watercolors, nothing serious, just the pond at different hours, the pine line, the way the fog sits on the water in the early morning before it burns off. I had set it down somewhere along the years, painting, and walked away from it and eventually stopped looking back for it. I don't know exactly when. I know it was gradual the way these losses tend to be. Harper asked on her last morning here whether she could come back for winter break. I said yes, that her grandfather's fishing rod would be waiting, that we would fix the dock before the ground froze if we moved quickly, that she could add to the bird notebook. She seemed satisfied by this. She zipped her backpack and ate her toast and told me I'd been taking the corner piece of the loaf every single morning, and the corner piece was the best piece, and that wasn't fair. I told her I had been taking the corner piece for 63 years, and I had no intention of stopping. She grinned, the same grin as the blueberry photograph, the same grin as her mother at her age, and said that was completely unfair. I told her she was absolutely right, and that I hoped she'd remember how it felt. The sun comes through the east window in the mornings and falls across the kitchen floor in a long, warm stripe. I sit in it with my tea, and I am not bracing for anything. I am not adjusting myself to fit the shape of someone else's household, not managing the temperature of a room by making myself smaller inside it. I wake up when I wake up. I go to bed when I'm tired. I make what I want for dinner. I take the corner piece. My name is on the deed, right beside his. I spent 4 years folding myself into a guest in a house where I helped hold everything together, and before that I spent a marriage being the kind of woman who made difficulty look easy so nobody else had to feel it. That is finished now. Not in anger, I don't carry much of that. But because somewhere between the dark highway and the crunch of pine needles under my tires and the key that still turned in the old lock, I found that I had not lost anything essential about myself. I had only set it down somewhere and forgotten to pick it back up. It was here the whole time, waiting, the way certain things do, for me to come back and claim it.